On the line right now, we're really incredibly privileged to have the one and only. She's a photojournalist. Her name is Lynsey Addario, and she was recently at Syracuse University, and she has an amazing story to tell. And we hear all this stuff going on with the Taliban and with ISIS in the Middle East. We're hearing it secondhand. This is a person that's seen it all firsthand. Lynsey, good morning. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So you, as a photojournalist, am I correct in saying that you were taken into captivity twice during your career?
I was taken hostage in Fallujah in Iraq in 2004, and again by forces loyal to Colonel Gaddafi in Libya in 2011.
And how were you treated?
Well, in 2004, it was sort of the height of the insurgency in Iraq, or the beginning of the insurgency in Iraq. And we were very lucky, actually, because I was working with a colleague for the New York Times, Jeffrey Gettleman, and we were able to explain repeatedly that we were journalists and we were unbiased and we were there for them and to tell their stories and to tell everyone's stories in Iraq. And eventually they let us go. They did not beat us. They had guns to our heads, of course, for hours, but they did not beat us. In Libya, it was very different. They tied us up, blindfolded us, beat us repeatedly, threatened us with execution.
Wow. And and you survived and lived to tell about it, which in some cases is not common, right?
Yeah, we were very, very lucky, and I wrote a book about it. It's called It's What I Do, and I detail both experiences, actually.
Now, do you wonder, I mean, you're dealing here with Taliban, you're dealing in Libya, you're dealing with what seems to be different people as opposed to ISIS, which seems to, part of their strategy is to kill people and put it all on display. Do you feel that way? Do you think that in some weird way you were lucky?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, ISIS is something altogether different. I think the Taliban, I think we were, in Iraq, we were taken to people loyal to Al-Qaeda or allied with Al-Qaeda. And I think both of those groups were nothing compared to ISIS. Had I been taken captive by ISIS, there would be no chance to survive at all. I think that they are brutal. I think as a woman, I haven't been raped. I've been very lucky. I'm not sure that would be the case with ISIS. ISIS takes women as slaves. They really make excuses for everything they do, and they find some justification in the Quran, which doesn't necessarily exist.
Yeah. Talk about the fact that it looks like there's a good chance that your story, It's What I Do, is going to be turned into a movie.
That is correct. Warner Brothers has optioned the book, and at this point, Steven Spielberg is slated to direct, and Jennifer Lawrence will be playing me.
Wow. Jennifer Lawrence, that's perfect.
Yeah, she's fabulous.
I mean, not many people in this world get to say, who would I like to play me in a movie to tell my story, but Jennifer Lawrence would be certainly
an
perfect.
Oscar winner, nonetheless.
How is it being a woman over there?
Look, I've always found it to be an advantage. I work in the Middle East, and a lot of these societies are segregated by gender, and I, as a woman, have access to the women. I also have access to the men. So I've always found it an advantage. I think, I have to prove myself, of course, when I did numerous military embeds over the years. I had to, prove that I could keep up in very rigorous patrols, sometimes at 7,000 feet for 6-7 hours. But if I was in shape and I could, then it was fine.
Yeah. We're talking to Lynsey Addario, and she is a photojournalist, has worked with New York Times and Newsweek and National Geographic and so many others. And when we all see these things on TV at 6:30 every night, or I guess 24 hours a day, it seems these days, it's one thing to see them on TV, but for you, Lynsey, you saw this stuff up close and personal. What was it like the first time, the deserts or the whatever scene it was that you saw for the very first time? That had to be somewhat surreal.
In terms of combat, or in terms of
Well, in terms of whatever first that you've been involved in. I mean, we see so many of these, whether it's combat or just a story about life in the Middle East. We see these all over the TV, and it just becomes ingrained in us every single day. But to then plop yourself right in there, and you're there, has to be a bit. There's a shock there. It's got to be a little bit of a shock.
Well, I guess I realized very quickly how privileged we in America are. I mean, I think, women around the world are not treated with the same respect that I have, for example, as an American woman. A lot of women they're not allowed to be educated. They can't choose the person they want to marry. They don't live on their own. They can't work. So these sort of differences to me were extraordinary. And I realized immediately, wow, I am so lucky to have been born and raised in America. Yeah.
Wow. By the way, it's LynseyAddario.com, Addario, and it's Lynsey, Lynsey. Also, it's whatidobook.com is a website. Andrew.
Speaking of your website, I'm looking at some of your work. It's brilliant, by the way. I just want to say, also, it is October Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I noticed on your website, it's very interesting how a lot of the pictures you take are about issues that are going on not just here, but are relevant here, but in other countries, and how different it is. And in particular, your piece on breast cancer in Uganda. Talk about the differences in healthcare that you saw, maybe as opposed to America in that nation.
Well, that was a devastating piece because I went there for the New York Times, and I was working with Denise Grady, who is the science correspondent for the New York Times. And when we got there, there was one cancer hospital in the entire country at that point. This was in 2013. And women who had a tumor or who had breast cancer basically would have to wait for weeks, if not months, to try and see someone. Now, a lot of the resources in Uganda ended up going to fight HIV/AIDS or to treat HIV/AIDS, and almost nothing went to cancer at that point. So a woman who had a tumor said, okay, this is just a death sentence, I will die. And that was so devastating because that's not absolutely the case. It's all about early detection and treating it. So that story was very sad. We followed 3 different women through their treatment, and 1 survived and 2 ended up passing away.
Wow. I want to ask you, I don't know if you had an opinion on U.S. foreign policy going in. If you did it change, or how did your photos and your visuals, how did it change your opinion on the world?
Well, I mean, look, I've always been sort of idealist. I've always been so proud to be American, and I realized the shortcomings of our foreign policy once I got overseas and started covering the wars, not so much in Afghanistan in the early days, but more in Iraq in 2003. I think it was very clear once I went into Iraq in 2003 that the reasons for going to war were completely fabricated, and that we had no plan for the aftermath of the ousting of Saddam Hussein. We left a lot of Iraqis without anything, and that was a big problem. I also saw the way our troops were not prepared to deal with Iraqis and Arab culture, and that's not the fault of our troops at all. I think it was the fault of the Pentagon because they should have taught them, and that's not the responsibility of these young kids who were thrown into this war. But it was really disillusioning, for me to see that and to say, that we're America, we're the United States. How dare we not prepare our own guys better? There were issues with freedom of speech. Sometimes I went to photograph wounded soldiers, and I had American guns turned on me saying, you can't photograph this, get out of here. And, what happened to the First Amendment? So for me, it was very eye-opening to experience these things.
Does it bother you when you realize that, I don't know, we're estimating, but 40% of America has such a negative impression on the media, that they see the media as the enemy, yet without the media and without the things that you do, we would never know. What's your take on all that?
Well, I think that, first of all, Donald Trump does not help that. I think that the way he goes around saying that we are the enemy, that the media is the enemy, is completely ridiculous, and it incites violence. I mean, if you look at the coverage from the the rallies. Even yesterday, there was a CNN correspondent who people were screaming things at him. I mean, this is only going to get worse. So I think people in positions of power, people certainly running for president, need to be a little more responsible about how they speak about the media. We are there to do a service for society. We are there to educate people. We are there to experience things so that the rest of you don't. So I think it's important to realize that this is a service.
And finally, what's the in your eyes the best picture you ever took?
Oh, I don't have a best picture. I think all of my pictures speak to me for different reasons. I think some of the pictures from Afghanistan, from the Korangal Valley. I was in a very big ambush with the Taliban. Those images will stay with me forever. Some of the breast cancer images will as well. I mean, I don't think there's one image.
The best picture, I'll give you your answer. The best picture will be the film, a motion picture that might just very well be a blockbuster done by Steven Spielberg. So, Lynsey, listen, thank you so much, A, for what you're doing, and B, for coming on with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lynsey Addario, and again, you can go to lynseyaddario.com and also itswhatidobook.com. Well worth checking out. You might see it on the film. It's all coming up. Got a break at WIBX.